Alright, so we're going to go through this Marriage and Family 2 final. We're going to just kind of go through it quick. Feel free to print it out and have a copy so you can write these down and fast forward and rewind as necessary. Alright. So number one, what is the one question that all spouses must ask themselves, right? So if you remember, we did an entire lesson on this, and that one question was, what is it like to be married to me? Right? What is it like to be married to me? Number two, explain the problem with trying to fix your spouse. So basically I want something here to the effect that that as long as you're trying to fix them, then they're often have the same mindset that they're trying to fix you. And so nobody's working on themselves, right? And so it just ends up being a total frustration because there's no change being made either way because nobody sees themselves as the problem, and so they're not actually doing anything to fix anything. They're just constantly viewing the problem as outside of themselves, and if you see the problem as outside of yourself, then you lose really the control to be able to fix it. So it's important to understand that there are things yourself that you can fix that can begin to fix your situation, right? Number three, explain the difference between a distancer and a pursuer. So this was just kind of a simple concept that some people no, I do not. Alright, the basic idea, sorry about that, between the distancer and the pursuer concept is that some people tend to, when they have issues come up, that they tend to be withdrawn, and that's their method of dealing with the problem. And then some people, their method of dealing with the problem is to pursue and to act on it, right? And so you have to be careful if one person is a pursuer and one person is a distancer. You have to at least be aware of your spouse's tendency, right? So if you're a pursuer, don't over pursue, and because if you over pursue, then the distancer will over distance, right? And then you end up being much more separated. So you kind of have to respect each other. And if you're a distancer, you can't over distance, because if you get too far, then you're then you've separated yourself from your spouse. So anyway, so you have to balance between that. Do not show that message again. Sounds good. All right. Number four, explain in your own words the implications of the scripture in Ephesians 5 that says husbands are to care for their wives by the washing of water of the word. So basically the idea there is that that Paul seems to be putting quite a strong level of responsibility on the husband to develop the wife, right? In the same way that Christ develops and pours into the church to strengthen the church, Paul is showing that same level of responsibility that the husband has over the wife. And so the implication then is that husbands should take their wife's growth and development as part of their responsibility as the head of the house, right? So it doesn't mean that the wife has no responsibility in it, but it does mean that the husband should see that as part of his role is to contribute to her development. Number five, explain what it means that a wife can fight her husband out of his natural position as head of the household. So basically that was the discussion that we had, that sometimes if a wife fights with her husband so much that in the fighting she can undermine his sense of confidence and leadership, and then end up wondering why he's not a confident leader in other instances in the home. And it could very well be that her method of fighting and arguing has undermined his sense of leadership in the home. All right. Number six, list and describe the 5 languages of apology. Okay, so basically I'll just go through these quick. First one is expressing regret. So that's saying I'm sorry. The next one is accepting responsibility. To say I was wrong in this. It was my fault. The third one is making restitution. What can I do to make it right? Okay. Number 4, genuinely repenting. And so that's I'm not going to do that again. I'm not going to go and do that anymore. And then the 5th one is requesting forgiveness. So that's saying, will you please forgive me? Right? That type of thing. Number 7, in a marriage, the desire for change should be motivated by love. Right? Number 8, explain why it is important to be patient with internal changes. Well, here's the thing. You know in yourself that you may be making growth on the inside, but you realize that not everybody sees the maturity that's going on the inside of you. And so in the back of your mind, you're growing a little more than everybody else is probably noticing. Or when you make changes, that not everybody picks up on it right away. And the same thing then, that same grace, that same wisdom, if you understand that about yourself, you need to project that then onto your spouse and at least give them the benefit of the doubt that there might be some changes going on internally inside of them that you're just not aware of yet. Doesn't mean that there is, but that should at least be in the back of your mind. That if it seems like they're trying to work towards some things and trying to grow, that you got to give them a little bit of time, because it's possible, if they have the right attitude towards it and they're accepting responsibility and wanting to make changes, and you maybe just don't see the fruit of it quick enough, then you should probably just hold back and say, okay, maybe there's some attitudes that are changing internally that will then down the road begin to produce some things that I can see and experience. So just like you may experience some changes internally before anybody else notices it, your spouse might have already made some changes internally, and you just haven't noticed it yet either, right? Okay. Number 9, why is getting to the root of someone's stubbornness essential for the process of change? So basically what I'm after here is the fact that sometimes we feel like people won't change and they're just being stubborn. But the truth of the matter is, most of the time, their stubbornness has a root, right? That there is something that they are holding on to that's causing them to be stubborn, something that they feel justified in that is producing that stubbornness. Maybe they think they're right, or they think that people shouldn't do such and such, or that you as the spouse should have done this that time, or something. Whatever it is, there's often a root that is producing the stubbornness that you're seeing. And so you can't really overcome the stubbornness until you become aware of the root that is causing the stubbornness. And then you can start attacking that root issue. But if you're just trying to attack stubbornness itself, you often don't get anywhere, because they feel justified about why they're being stubborn. So that's why it's so important to find out what it is that is causing them to be so stubborn. All right, okay. Number 10, discuss Paul's principle of becoming all things in the context of marriage. So that's the group discussion that you did, using that scripture that Paul says, I become all things to all people so as to win some. And so it's that kind of principle of adapting for the good of the other, right? And so I want you to, kind of in your own words, maybe discuss a few points from that. Number 11, give 2 implications of the principle that should be that our hearing is influenced by past experience, right? Give 2 implications of the principle that our hearing is influenced by past experience. I want you to go back in and look at, I think I have the video up for that one. Yeah, I do. Okay, so go back, because one of the videos we lost, but I think we have this one. So go back in and give 2 implications of the principle that our hearing is influenced by past experience, right? So I did a whole lesson on how hearing is influenced. The way we see our current situation is influenced by things that we've gone through in the past, right? So go back in, look at that lesson, and come up with some ideas for that. Just 2 principles kind of from that lesson. Number 12, what role do expectations play in our marriage frustrations? So the basic idea is, that James says, what causes arguments and fights among you? Is it not that you want and you're not getting? So the idea is that often our frustration is related to our level of expectation. And so sometimes our expectations are absolutely realistic, and we should be frustrated in what we're getting. Sometimes, though, it is our expectations that are unrealistic, and that is causing our frustration. Sometimes people in marriage are looking for the perfect spouse, and so their expectation is wrong, and so they live with a constant state of frustration. And if they would just have a more realistic and fair set of expectations, then their frustrations in the marriage would be changed, right? Okay. Number 13, describe the implication for parenting. So at this point, we're kind of shifting into some of the parenting ones. Describe the implication for parenting of the biblical truth that we are made in God's image. What I'm wanting there is that we talked about how being made in God's image, I'm going to give you a hint on this one, and I want you to look it up yourself, that we are made in God's image, but that doesn't just mean that we look like God. That there are internal qualities that are a reflection of God's image as well. So that's your clue. Number 14, what does it mean that some parents only parent behavior? It means that that they're not trying to parent character and internal beliefs and values and the way that their child sees the world. They're basically parenting behavior. And so as long as their child behaves correctly, then there's no parenting going on. The parenting, the action of the parent only kicks in if the child is misbehaving, and the parent will come in and correct. But in terms of all the other things, of pouring into their child and being intentional about forming their beliefs and their value system and their character, often many parents don't do that. They take the path of least resistance, which is just to parent when something's going wrong. Number 14, what does it mean that some parents only parent behavior? All right, we just did that one. Number 15, what truths can we learn about parenting from watching how Jesus developed his disciples? Right? So there's a few things in that one. I think that Jesus used their kind of circumstances, right, to teach them things. I think that's one principle. I think there's quite a few things that you could go back in and look at. Things like he wasn't just interested in what they did. He wanted to make sure that they did it for the right reasons. I think that's an important principle. Jesus modeled behavior for them. So I think those are some good ones to get you started there. All right. Number 16, what does it mean to apply age-appropriate responsibilities and disciplinary measures? The basic idea here is that children at different age groups not only think differently, but they experience the world differently, right? And they respond differently to things. So you have to use age-appropriate methods, right? And so you may need to do some extra research, right? So this class we didn't go into maybe necessarily a lot of detail about what are age-appropriate responses for each age section, right? We just highlighted the fact that they exist, right? And we give a few examples. So as a parent, if you're going to be parenting, if you still have kids, or if you're going to, if you've got grandkids, you need to take some responsibility, maybe do some further research and say, okay, so for the age group that I'm dealing with right now, what are the age-appropriate ways of teaching, and what are age-appropriate types of responsibility that I can entrust them with, and then also what are age-appropriate types of discipline, right? So the idea is that what we want to avoid is often when we become adults, we tend to forget what it was like to be children and to go through that growth process. And so if we're not careful, we will try and treat our children at a level of logic and reasoning that we are at currently, and then we totally miss how children learn at a young age, right? Okay. Number 17. List and describe the 3 negative parental behaviors given in class and the corresponding negative effect they have on a child's internal image. All right, so that's the one I want you to do on your own. So you'll need to go back in and find that lesson. All right. I believe it was probably week 6 or 7 at the end of the parenting discussion there. Go back in and find that one and look at those 3. It was right at the end. I gave you 3 kind of parental things. I'll give you one of them just so you are on the right lesson. When I said if a parent doesn't establish boundaries, then it creates a child that has, and then I explained that, and then I gave you 2 other things. If a parent doesn't do this, it creates this behavior in a child. So that's the discussion that you want to find. Number 18, what must be established before discipline can be effective? Control. The atmosphere of control. Number 19, what does it mean that discipline is more about the future than the present? All right, so I only touched on this a little bit, so I'm going to talk about this just for a second. That the mistake that a lot of parents make is they think discipline is just to get the kid to quit doing whatever it is that they're doing right there in the moment. And so their whole mindset of discipline is just corrective behavior. But discipline is more about the future. It's about what you're trying to create in them, right? And so because it's about what you're trying to create in them for the future, it's not just obey me and do this, or it's an entire system of discipline and control that you have in the home where you're giving them structure and boundaries. Sometimes it's corrective if you have to spank them. Other times it's preventative or it's formative. You're trying to form something in them through the discipline and the structure that you have in the home. And so the idea is that those types of things are about the future growth of your child. But if you only see discipline as something for the moment, then you tend to view discipline just as something you do when your child's misbehaving, and then you step in and you discipline them so that you can correct their behavior for right now. But really, the purpose of discipline is about what you're producing for the future in your child, right? And number 20, what does it mean you should not allow your child to despise your discipline? So basically, we talked about this. If you discipline them, correct them, and they do it, but they do it with a bad attitude, you need to challenge that, because what you're trying to form in them isn't so much the doing, it's the attitude behind the doing. So if they pick up their toys but they throw them in the toy box, you have to challenge that, because what you're really after is not to get the toys in the toy box. What you're really after is for them to have a good attitude about being responsible, right? And so if they throw the things in there and you let that go, they have learned to be obedient but harbor resentment to your authority on the inside. So you have to deal with their resentment of your authority as well. Okay. All right. So if you do these, if you have any questions, feel free to email me. But as long as you know this material, you should be just fine for your final.